Congratulations, Representative Bright. Welcome to the State Board.
Thank you.
We are delighted to have you.
First, I do want to thank the board for their resolution outlining the recommendations to me and to OSSI relating to the STAR framework. This evening, I want to take a couple of minutes and provide you with a broad timeline for how we intend to approach this work. This month, OSSI will spend time reviewing the contents of the board's resolution. And at the March working session, my team will present to you all our response to that resolution. We will focus on outlining the substantive parameters for updating the statewide accountability system. Also in March, we will undertake and begin our engagement with LEAs regarding the STAR framework and the revision. We're also going to begin engaging with other external focus groups to gather feedback. That engagement will last throughout the spring, and I commit to keeping the board informed in our progress. In June, we will finalize our ESSA amendment and post it publicly for comment. As it is customary with this board, we will present it at 2 working sessions, in June and in July, and seek approval by this board that's consistent with the statutory authority in July. This will allow us to submit the amendment to the United States Department of Education for approval prior to the beginning of the 2022-23 school year. This program provides support and assistance for DC residents who are seeking a high demand career field in information technology, health science, and education at 3 local universities: the University of the District of Columbia, its community college, Catholic University, and Trinity Washington University. These scholarships are up to $8,000 per academic year and can be used to cover tuition, fees, and other costs of attendance. The application is currently open. We are so excited to share this opportunity. I hope you all will share it with your constituents. And the application is going to remain open until August 19th of 2022.
The mayor, of course, has announced a 5.9% increase in the base amount in the city's funding formula, the Uniform for Student Funding formula. DCPS says that every school received an increase, most of them substantial, but there's a very big catch. That claim is based on a version of this year's budgets that does not include $3.4 million for librarians added by the council, and $39.4 million in COVID recovery funds. And the mayor's increase is mostly simply replacing money that is already in the school budgets. If we count that money and compare those totals for each school with the allocations for next year, there are 61 schools that will have less money next year than they have this year. And that doesn't account increased cost. When I updated this year's budgets to next year's prices, I found that 77 out of 115 schools didn't have enough to maintain their current staff positions and other resources.
This is the time for a big statement to target resources where they are needed most for students designated as at risk. We don't yet know the weight for students designated as at risk, but the last year's weight of 0.24 remained well below the 0.37 weight recommended in the adequacy study.
And it's definitely not enough lead time in terms for the LSAT team to be able to digest all of the requirements necessary to formulate the budget. It tends to be a sprint. Why is this process not a year-long budgeting process? So that we can actually, take in additional data to understand. So when it comes time for us allocating all this money towards this programming, we'd be able to make some of these better choices.
And you all think about this budget, and it could be yes or no, or it could be a little bit more. Do you see school equity and stability addressed?
Well, this is Mary Lady, and I say absolutely not. I'm very disappointed. I had hoped for much more.
I would have to agree as well. We were going over the budget actually a couple of days ago before this, and looking at the weights of 0.3% more of this and a couple more dollars over this. I'm like, this is really not getting to. We're talking about a lot of schools over here in 7-8 are at risk.
Ms. Coffin or Commissioner Holmes, any comments on transparency, what we could do better?
I think for me, just in the immediate term, I would like more information about the spending of ESSER dollars and recovery. I think knowing how those funds are spent and who is being impacted over these next couple of years will give us a better sense of what's going to happen when they're not here in a couple of years.
So, hello, members of the board. My name is Leah Blue. I'm a parent to a 9-year-old who attends Harriet Tubman Elementary School in Ward 1. Tonight, I'm calling for a reform of the process in place to inform parents of infectious illnesses found in our schools. Micah was fully vaccinated last year, but he became a breakthrough case. His quarantine began that day with keeping him home and in his room away from the family. We tended him for days, administering his nebulizer to prevent complications from his asthma. He was lonely and there was nothing we could do. I wondered why we hadn't received notification. Where was our notice? Clearly, someone with COVID was close to my son. After 11 days, Micah was able to go back to school and to rejoin the family. At dinner that very night, I looked over at him and thought I noticed something moving in his hair. There were lice. We ordered lice shampoo immediately, but knew there'd be no combing out of this many lice from a head full of locks. So we had only one option. We both stood crying in the bathtub as I cut away his locks. Not only was someone close enough to give my son COVID, someone had been close enough to give him lice. Again, where was my notice?
I'm still puzzled and frustrated by the amount of testing my students have had to endure and all the testing that is yet to come. To give a small snapshot, in the 3 weeks of January that we had, my 9th grade students had to endure a testing mix of Math ANET, which is an achievement test, Math Map Growth, which is adaptive, meaning it changes based on what you get right, what you get wrong, English Language Arts ANET, English Language Arts SRI, and either a biology or history test that's also adaptive. And that's just like the DCPS mandated testing. Our students are not simply data points on their academic achievement. And we talked all this talk at the beginning of the school year about focusing on social emotional learning, focusing on the whole child. We even had a speaker, Dr. Bettina Love, talk about anti-racism in schools. And a key thing she pointed out was the testing and the racist and classist history of it. And yet this is the year I've seen the most testing in my 5 years here in DCPS.
A year ago, we were awash in talk of reimagining education post-pandemic. But this year brought another year of the pandemic and very little reimagining. Think about flexible scheduling. We're collaborating with teachers, principals, OSSE, the DME, and outside experts right now to envision potential models for flexible scheduling, including student enrichment days, which could be a huge win-win for students and educators alike. We hope you'll support our budget ask to the mayor and council for $6 million to pilot flexible schedules next school year. As of 2019, half of DC charter schools actually had starting teacher salaries below the DC living wage, as defined by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. The salary needed to afford a studio apartment in DC.
In most elementary schools, we're seeing that there's usually one counselor, one social worker. Sometimes there's outside providers, but they come sparingly, and there's servicing student population somewhere upward from 200 to 600. And a therapist is only seeing like 25 to 30 people. So I'm just trying to understand, like, how does one counselor and one social worker provide adequate and allotted services to our student population?
Mentioning possibly one counselor, one social worker, that model might not be adequate for all schools. What recommendations do you have?
The trend that we're seeing in EC is that the growing population of the ELL community within DC. So we want to make sure that we also are getting our bilingual counselors in here as well. I think that maybe if we had a counselor from 1st to 3rd grade, maybe that might help just for those particular grades, certain service that population.
My 9-year-old, we opted him out of testing.
Because we're interested for our older students in how do we have more vocational programming? How do we have more internship opportunities for them? With our younger students, how do they have more experiential and project-based learning? And it's hard to do all those things. And it's hard for teachers to have the time they need without changing something about the day or the week. And so if we start to think about models where you're actually able to open up a day of the week or a part of each day, so that there can be flexibility to give teachers more time back and give students more enrichment, that could really be transformative. So
made me think of the Wednesdays that students receive during virtual learning. But is this something that we need to consider bringing back? Because I think this would be something that would benefit students and teachers.
Exactly what we're talking about is essentially bringing back the Wednesdays, but before parents get upset, students would be in school 5 days a week. They would be doing something dramatically different, though, potentially on one of those days.
We really appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening.